Hey, it's Rachel. In my last July garden tour video, I had touched briefly on the berry plants that you see behind me, and I'd mentioned then that I was going to do a video on pruning these. It's an important topic, it's a good time of year to talk about it, and I've kind of got a case study here of why you want to stay on top of it. Well, my raspberry bush is, nicely pruned, open in the middle, ready to go. My blackberry bush is a different story. I did not really pay attention to pruning this at all last year. It's part of my motivation for making this video, so you guys don't have to deal with this. You need to know two things in order to prune these well. First, the difference between primocanes and floricanes and the ability to discern between the two on your plants. And second, the kind of plant that you have. There are three different types: floricane or summer bearing, primocane or fall bearing, and everbearing. And I'm going to talk through how to prune all three types. Starting with those different cane types, primocanes are canes in their first year of growth. They have pliable, bendy, green stems. If you leave those canes in place to mature, in the second year of their growth, they develop brown, woody stems, and these are what we call floricanes. Very visually different. At the same time, new primocanes are springing up, usually from the center of the plant. This means that an established plant will have a mix of both types of canes on it at any given point. I'll use my raspberry plant to illustrate this. This is a primocane. It's green, leafy. This is a first year growth. If I dig into the middle here, you can see there was a cane from last year. This is from last year. It's now brown and woody. The reason you even care about this is that different kinds of plants will set their fruit on different kinds of canes. I'll start with your summer bearing or floricane plants. Earlier in the year, usually June, the floricanes grow fruiting shoots from their brown woody stems, and these then become your source of fruit. This is a brown woody stalk. It's a cane from last year. It is in its second year of life. But coming off of that woody stem are now these new growths, which are my fruiting bodies. Personally, when my blackberry plants are in full production, I can't even see the brown woody stems anymore because they are so heavily draped with these fruiting shoots. Fall-bearing or primocane types will set a fruiting crop their first year of growth from the canes. Those green stems will sprout fruiting bodies usually out towards the end, sometime around late July into August or even early September. You can see that here with my raspberries that are just starting to set their primocane crop. Everbearing varieties have been selected to set a crop on both their primocanes and their floricanes. I personally grow an everbearing raspberry type because I like the staggered harvest. Others prefer to get one large fruit set either in the summer or in the fall. Comes down to personal preference. Let me show you how to prune all three types. I'll start with the simplest example, which would be your fall-bearing or primocane types, or if you're pruning for a fall crop. The primocanes will emerge in the spring and grow. You will leave them alone until they set their fruit in the fall, at which point you will then prune them off on the ground after you finish harvesting. I'll do a little overview here of what that looks like. Summer crops, floricane types, or if you're pruning for a summer crop only, a little more complicated. First thing here is to prune the primocane tips in the summer. Now we're not worried about getting a fall crop here, and so we're going to go ahead and prune off the growing tips of our primocanes when they get to about 4 feet tall. We do this to promote lateral branching. Fruiting bodies then come off of all of those laterals, and you'll get a much bigger harvest. So I'll come in with a pair of pruners, just like this, and cut off the tip. It is now 11 days after I pruned off this primocane, and you can see that in those 11 days, it has already thrown off this whole side branch, this whole side branch, and this whole side branch. I am now going to go in and prune the tips off of these guys and see if I can get those to also start creating lateral branches. As those primocanes are growing those lateral branches, your floricanes in the meantime are setting their crop. This happens in June into July. You then prune those off at the base after harvesting, and you trellis those primocanes outward. When we get to the end of the season, I will cut out and remove at the base any of these brown woody stems because they've already done their job. What I like to do is just get down into the base of the plant because you can see dramatic contrast between the green stems of the primocanes and the brown stems of the floricanes. I'll do a quick kind of exploratory shake of these floricanes. Just give it a quick visual examination, make sure it doesn't have any active berries on it. As an example, this floricane does still have some fruit ripening, so I'm gonna leave that one alone. But I would say go through when you're at the end of your harvest, find those brown stems, and for each of them, just quickly make sure there's no fruit still sitting on it. And if not, go in and cut them off at the base and remove them. This also creates a great opportunity to go through and weed if there is anything. The raspberries form such a thick canopy that there's not much down here, but every now and then there's a little weed. So I will go through and clean this out. And then my next step is to take the primocanes that are currently in the middle of this bed and pull them off and secure them to this trellis to then make them easier to harvest next season, as well as to open up the middle of the bed with some sunlight so that more primocanes can shoot up from the middle next year. This is why you see so many people using these T-shaped trellises like the ones that I use in my plants behind me. A few down here that are a little too short to trellis, but otherwise you can see made a nice V shape, tying these canes off to this side, this cane's off to this side, and eventually when these get taller, I will do the same to them. And it results in the middle having a ton more sunlight coming in. So next year, these become floricanes and they will shoot off a bunch of fruiting clusters and I'll be able to harvest them more readily from the outside. Same over here, and then the new primocanes can come up in the middle and I'll leave them alone until the end of the year and then repeat this process. And I'll do an overview here for the summer ones as well. The last type you need to know about is everbearing. These varieties have been selected over time to set a crop on both their floricanes and the primocanes, allowing for a more gradual extended harvest. These are some of my floricanes. They've come off of a second-year growth. These are starting to peter out. Pretty much harvested off most of the fruit. The harvest is pretty much tapering off and getting to its end on these floricanes. But if I go down here, this is an example of a primocane. You can see these have barely even set fruit. And so consequently, you get this really nice extended staggered harvest. And that is great because raspberries are fairly perishable and they're not going to hold up well for you once you harvest them. So it's nice to be able to take them out a little bit at a time rather than getting one just huge honking harvest. They are a little trickier to prune. You do not prune them in the spring. You leave the primocanes alone, meaning your first step comes only after your floricanes have fruited in the summer. You do remove those at the end of that harvest, cut them down to the ground and open up the plant. From here, you trellis the primocanes, just like we talked about a minute ago, and move them to the outside of the trellis for easier harvesting. Wait until they set their fall crop of fruit out at their tips, and only then do you give them a header cut. You cut them back by about 1/3 to encourage lateral branching to happen into next year and a larger floricane crop. You can safely do this because they have now set their fall crop. If you cut back to the highest branch that flowered, you won't remove anything that can set flowers next year, and you will encourage a little bit of lateral branching to have bushier floricanes going into next season. This is a primocane on my everbearing raspberry plant. You can see it is currently setting its fall crop. At the end, when these fruiting bodies are spent, I will go ahead and prune off all of that. It is not going to re-flower or set fruit next year, so I can cut that off and then hopefully promote some lateral branching in the meantime. Everything that remains from that point further down in the plant will become a floricane next year. And here is an overview of the everbearing types. Now that said, I did run an experiment this year. I took just a few of my primocanes on the raspberry and I did cut them back with that header cut when they were about 4 feet tall. The risk of doing this is I would get less of a harvest off of my primocanes, but I kind of wanted to see what would happen and whether or not I could get the lateral branching and still get a primocane crop in the fall. Let me show you what happened there. Here is an example of a primocane that I did not do this to. I gave this the conventional treatment, meaning I just left it alone. This is a single primocane stalk. You can see it's setting a nice crop of berries. I'm actually going to harvest these as soon as I stop filming. This is kind of what you would typically see. And in contrast, behind it, you can see this one, I did give that header cut to. You can see that was my header cut. I did that earlier in the spring, and it did result in a whole bunch of lateral branching. Now it is delayed. They are flowering. I am still going to get a fall crop off of this, but it is, as you can see, much less mature in terms of its flowers. These are just barely budding out in contrast to the more mature stems. Hopefully, these guys will still set a crop well ahead of my first frosts, and I'll be able to get a larger primocane crop just later. I think next year what I'm going to do is do this to every other cane. I only did it to 2 or 3 this year as an experiment, but next year I think I'll do every other cane because I like the idea of having a more gradual staggered harvest of the fruit, and maybe half of them can produce now in August and hopefully half of them I'll get a larger amount coming in more of like late September, and I can extend my harvest even more than I already do by having an everbearing type. That's it. That's the some knowledge I have on how to prune cane fruits. If there's anything I didn't mention, or if you have questions, please drop them below and I will do my best to answer. Otherwise, until next time, I hope that was helpful. Thanks.